So much to get to with my first guest. I'm so glad he's here, former Oversight Committee Chairman and Utah Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Great to see you, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, we have to start with, I want to get to tax reform because we've heard this language before, but there was a couple of questions I have for that. But let's first talk about this deal that he made with the Democrats today on the debt ceiling and Harvey relief. Do you think that this kind of is a sign that he's willing to reach across the aisle and do maybe what McConnell and Paul Ryan couldn't do, and that's get some meaningful legislation finally passed?
Well, he certainly is showing that. I mean, there he is in the Oval Office inviting the Democrats in to make a deal. Look, everybody wants Harvey funding relief, but a lot of us did believe that it should have been a quote-unquote clean bill, that should have been a standalone vote. But it'd be interesting to see in the actual language how far extended that debt ceiling is. If it's just for 3 months, you know, you kind of wince at it, but that's a whole different thing than if they added $2 trillion and tried to extend it for another couple of years, because it really is an impetus to drive the discussion about how we're actually going to stop having to raise the debt ceiling. But everybody wants to see the financial relief, obviously, which is just the beginning. I mean, that's barely going to get you through 1 month or so of payments, given the devastation in Texas and Louisiana. You
know what, though, Congressman, and I'm still going to call you Congressman because it's always how I've known you. What I found so interesting, though, is that you had John Cornyn, Senator John Cornyn from Texas, say that he believed that funding for Harvey relief should be tied to the debt ceiling. That surprised me. You also had Mitch McConnell saying the same thing. They wanted to tie it. I'm wondering if that's the moment when President Trump decided, I'm going to pivot and reach out to Pelosi and Schumer.
Look, I'm just guessing here, but look, Senator Cornyn is taking very different positions, is my understanding. I could be corrected, but he's taken very different positions on this along the way. Obviously, he's going to look out for the state of Texas and getting that type of funding as best he can. Look, ideally, we want the whole country. We want people on all sides of the aisle, both sides of the aisle, to support that funding. But you know, debt ceiling, there's a reason why for more than 100 years we've had one. It's so that it's a flashing red light, an alarm system, if you will, to say, hey, our house is on fire. We gotta change the trajectory here.
Let me ask you about some of the things that he talked about just now in Bismarck, North Dakota. He talked about the importance of the corporate tax cut, the initial proposal from the White House, 15%. We'll see where that stands. We didn't hear a specific number from the president just now, but he also said that he wants to end the death tax. He wants to, of course, make the tax code simple, more fair. But it doesn't sound like they've got quite everything written down. How realistic is it, though? We need to get this done in the next few days, or at least get the debate started, correct?
Well, I don't think there's this deadline of the end of September in order to get tax reform. I'm glad that the president and the senators in particular are still talking about tax reform as opposed to just tax cut. Obviously, the estate tax plays well in North Dakota and Middle America, particularly a lot of farming states. That's a big, big deal. The repatriation, bringing back what I think will be hundreds of billions of dollars infused into our economy, that's a huge part about this territorial system that Republicans have really championed for a long time, and will be a great stimulator to the economy, because if we can get that economic growth where GDP is growing at 3+%, that does buoy up all resources and all revenue. But my biggest fear with all of this discussion is we haven't cut spending. Now, we're going to have to spend more. I mean, you got Irma bearing down on Florida. That's going to cost untold billions of dollars. You got, what we're going to have to do in Texas and Louisiana. But what's absent from this discussion is, are we going to actually cut anything? Because we're having to raise the debt ceiling because we're nearly $20 trillion in debt. Remember, there was about 24 trillion gallons of water that flowed onto Texas and Louisiana. Look at that visual and think about each one, 1 gallon being $1. That's how far in debt we are in this country. Right. We've got to do something about this.
I agree with you about spending and controlling spending. And I guess one step at a time with this president as he tries to fulfill his campaign promises. But one of his biggest was, of course, tax reform, you know, getting these American companies to develop and keep their money here in the United States versus parking it overseas. And I think the reason I asked you about that pivot that I kind of feel like I saw today with President Trump, and we can speculate about it, is the fact that I think he saw that with Harvey relief, with funding, FEMA running out of money by the end of the week, the debt ceiling, the continuing resolution, all of that in these, you know, now 10 days of legislative days left for the month of September, it seems to me the president realized, if I don't pivot back to tax reform and put that on the front page of the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning, I'm going to get criticized. And so I'm wondering if he maybe did that today. He cut this deal with Schumer and Pelosi because he thought, wait a minute, I'm going to go ahead and get this off the table because it's a distraction. I mean, that's all that the cable networks talked about today, was this fight about raising the debt ceiling, the fight about Harvey funding. Again, we're speculating, but I think that there's something there.
Well, look, clearly he set up this, he was intending, the White House plans these things a couple weeks in advance. I think we wasted most of August not talking about tax reform. We hadn't sort of prepped the American people for what this is ultimately going to look like. I don't believe anybody thinks that they're going to get a vote on this, on taxes in September. Everything is come to a crescendo there in December. I think that's when you're going to see all the major funding for the rest of the year, additional debt ceiling issues, taxes, immigration. I mean, everything gets packed into there. But we've seen this movie before, and it's not a good one. But what I'm trying to suggest is, it's great to cut taxes. It will stimulate the economy. But we had all-time record receipts to the Treasury, and yet we're still hundreds of billions of dollars in the red. You have to cut spending. And instead of talking about repurposing of appropriated dollars and trying to tighten the belt, saying, how are we going to pay for all this flood relief, there are other places in government to cut in order to fund what you have to deal with in an emergency such as Harvey and Irma.